The term action-oriented players is part of a general action-oriented approach to running TTRPGs. Essentially, this means giving your NPCs and PCs loads of cool abilities to do when they act. This can make combat more dynamic and make the game even more fun for you and your players. This video will focus a lot on examples from Dungeons & Dragons, but really the principles can be applied to any game or TTRPG. A great deal of inspiration for this video comes from Matt Colville's video, Action-Oriented Monsters, which is linked below. In that video, he addresses a common problem encountered with D&D 5e's combat, specifically when the bad guys, or singular bad guy, have way less actions than the players and get steamrolled as a result. In his video, Matt argues that action-oriented monsters are a way of combating this disparity in the amount of actions bad guys have versus the players. To illustrate what action-oriented monsters are, let's look at an example of one I recently used. I was recently running D&D and the party entered a crystalline cave. In the cave, they had to fight a crystal golem, which was a golem I designed that was loosely based off of the flesh golem in D&D. Here is the stat block for the flesh golem, a CR5 monster. It has a number of traits which serve to make it slightly more unique from other monsters, but they don't actually let it do anything extra. If you look at its actions, you'll notice it can only really do one thing on its turn. It can do 2 slam attacks that just deal damage but have no further effect. Personally, I think the flesh golem is really boring. Imagine your party is to fight this thing, and all it can do is the same slam over and over again. The combat probably won't be very engaging, and it won't feel very dynamic. Here are the notes I made for my crystal golem. I mostly ignored the traits that the flesh golem had, and focused pretty much only on the actions. My crystal golem can also do 2 attacks in one turn, and has a club attack, which is basically identical to the flesh golem's slam attack. In addition though, I've given the crystal golem a basic ranged attack it could use, where it shoots crystals at you. It also has an ability that can disorient an enemy, allowing its next attack to have advantage against them if they fail a constitution saving throw. And finally, it has an area of effect attack that allows it to smash the ground of the cave, causing huge crystal stalactites to fall from the ceiling and potentially land on enemies. This is its big attack, so once it uses this ability, it first has to recharge before it can be used again. It also lets the crystal golem use the environment to its advantage, and I also let the players do the same. My party's combat with my crystal golem ended up being way more engaging than I think any combat with the base flesh golem would have been. It made the combat more dynamic, as the golem could attack the party up close and from far away. The actions my crystal golem takes are also deliberately thematic. I spent time thinking about what could make the fight memorable, and I think the sonorous ringing ability, which allows the golem to emit a disorienting frequency that resonates with all the crystals around the chamber, is particularly effective in this regard. Essentially, the crystal golem's actions aren't just meant to make the combat more fun. They also reinforce the narrative and make the crystal golem feel like a crystal golem. In contrast, D&D's flesh golem is lacking in this department, as it is restricted to just slamming enemies with its arms. Hopefully I've got you interested in this action-oriented approach at this point, and so we can start to examine how it can be used for your players. Essentially, you can give players new abilities or skills as a reward, instead of or even on top of traditional loot such as magic items or gold. These abilities are not limited to, but could include extra combat abilities, for example allowing a rogue to gain movement speed after landing an attack, or giving a wizard the ability to teleport as a reaction. It could be as simple as giving a character an extra attack every round. Extra social abilities, for example letting a bard reroll when they fail to charm someone a set amount of times per day, or deciding that a knight might automatically succeed when trying to persuade lower-ranking soldiers to follow their orders after having earned their respect. Bonuses to skill checks, such as a veteran cleric getting a bonus to their die roll when recalling the history of their own religion. Modification of existing abilities, like adding an effect to a character's ability when it is used or allowing the character to use it more often, or simply adding or modifying the effects and abilities of a character's items and magic items. These abilities might be temporary. They might only be able to be used one time, have a set amount of uses, or only last for a certain amount of time, be it an hour or a week. Maybe they can only be used a few times a day, or only in certain locations. Or perhaps they are permanent, a constant reminder of the quests the adventurer has been on. To give a detailed example, imagine your players have just fought and killed a fire-breathing dragon. Your players will most likely be expecting to get access to the dragon's treasure hoard, packed with gold and magic items for them to use on future adventures. Absolutely, there is nothing wrong with giving them this loot. However, you could also consider giving your players special abilities after the fight. Perhaps one of them has been hardened by the dragon's fire and is now resistant to fire and burning. Maybe the wizard, after observing the dragon and its minions, can now tap into the ability of True Sight, allowing them to see through magic and uncover hidden eldritch secrets in the world. Or maybe the fighter has just learned how to better swing their sword. Give them an ability where they can cleave 3 enemies at once, making it harder for bad guys to surround them. Or literally anything you think is cool. Really, the possibilities are endless. It is advisable to work with your players when designing these abilities, and to keep the goals of their characters in mind. After all, it is what characters can do that makes them unique. The wizard is different from the fighter precisely because they can cast spells, just like the witch is different from the wizard in how they might cast spells and the kinds of spells they will cast. The goal of giving your players more actions is not simply to make the game more fun. Similarly to how the actions of the crystal golem I showed earlier reinforced its themes and made it feel like a crystal golem, not just any golem, the abilities you give your players should be unique to them to make them feel special. It should feel like the abilities they get make sense narratively and thematically for the story, character, and the world. At least, that's the game I like to run. As a final note, I'd like to talk about balance. You may be wondering how you're going to balance making or designing all these new abilities. Firstly, talk to your players about it. When you're next sitting at the table, literally just say, "Hey, I've been thinking of trying this new approach. I might mess up the balance as we're testing it out, so please bear with me." Secondly, start small. Don't go throwing 500 new abilities at your players in one session. Give them out slowly over the course of the adventure when it makes sense narratively. Also, D&D already has a lot of these abilities built in. You can rip off abilities from different monsters, or from feats, or from classes and backgrounds, or whatever TTRPG you're running, the same will apply. Think about abilities in your favorite video game even, or stuff Indiana Jones does in movies. These things can all influence what you're going to let your players do. Furthermore, remember you can give your bad guys abilities too. If you like the idea of action-oriented players, you can use the action-oriented monsters suggested by Matt Colville to even the playing field. If you're giving your players more tools to play with, you can definitely do the same with your bad guys. And finally, don't be scared to change stuff. Take my Crystal Golem as an example again. If I used it again, would I keep it exactly the same? Probably not. There's always something you might want to tweak or feel like could have been done better, and that's okay. You can always change stuff after sessions, during sessions, or whenever. It's your game, and designing these extra actions and abilities should be fun.